Welcome back to the SENWA studio out here at Optus Stadium. Well, you know the song, I am, you are, we are Australian. Well, Bryce Cotton isn't yet, and he doesn't care anymore. He wants to be here, he wants to spend time here, he wants to play some basketball here, but he's sick and tired of waiting for the Australian government to say that he can be called an Australian. Craig O'Donoghue covers basketball for the West Australian. He also covers footy. He's excellent at both. He's just witnessed Bryce win his 70th MVP for the Perth Wildcats. Of course, there's the upcoming semi-final series against Melbourne United later in the week. Craig, what do you make of your interview with Bryce when he said that he's basically over it a bit as far as citizenship goes?
Yeah, it's disappointing for him. I feel it's embarrassing, I think, for the country, and it's the way he's been treated for 5 years now. And I don't blame him for saying, well, I'm done with this. Like, he's someone who has to travel overseas for his job to be able to do it properly. They went to Japan last year and played. They went to New Zealand last year and played twice. And he is someone who goes home every off-season to the States and trains like a madman to come back and win 5 MVPs. So we can argue that going back to the States helps him to be the player that he is, as well as allowing him to see family. But the extra time allows him to train. And unfortunately, as part of the rules, you're not allowed to spend more than 90 days out of the country in the 12 months before you apply for citizenship. And he's spent more than that, which means he has to wait until May 28th to be eligible. And he wants to go home and see his family in April. And he said, I'm not going to hang around and wait for May 28th. I've got plans. My kid's in school. We'll go during the school holidays. And if that extends it, who cares? And if I don't have to become an Australian citizen ever because I want to do these things, well, who cares? I'm done with it, he said. So he said they can keep it, and he will just continue living in Australia as a permanent resident with his Australian wife and his Australian-born child.
I loved his attitude to it. I think he represented himself really well. Well, there are salary cap implications if Bryce Cotton becomes an Australian citizen, are there not? And is there a whiff of that being a factor in this lukewarm support that he's received from basketball about citizenship?
Yeah, well, so it would be about $280,000, I think, of his salary, around that sort of figure, would go into the salary cap if he was Australian. And let's imagine he's paid the $1 million that we think he's going to get next year from the Wildcats if he signs. So that's a tiny percentage of that goes into the salary cap if he's Australian. If he's an import, the whole $1 million goes in. So that's the big difference. It just wipes out most of the salary cap from the Wildcats straight away. So they have always been desperate to get him into the citizenship scenario so that he's no longer having that big whack of money going into the salary cap. And he has always understood the importance of that as well. The problem there is you're going to have other clubs not wanting to push for him to get citizenship if he's not guaranteed to be in the Olympics, because then it's an advantage for the Wildcats. So there's politics always going on in the background. But yeah, there's no doubt that that is a factor when it comes to the citizenship scenario. And he will earn more money now overseas than what the Wildcats can realistically pay him, because he's going to remain an import. And that is definitely a problem for them.
That's really sad if we were to lose Bryce Cotton to an overseas league because of petty club politics and petty basketball politics. If they had made stronger representations to get citizenship for Bryce Cotton, is there potential for these rules to be waived, or are they pretty much set in concrete?
So it's my understanding that the citizenship minister can do whatever the hell he wants in certain scenarios. So there is a phrase called ministerial discretion, where he can say, well, we are going to consider Bryce's travel to be important for his athletic career because he has a distinguished talent visa. The problem with that is the wording of the distinguished talent visa refers to representing Australia, and it doesn't refer to playing in an Australian league. So there's some challenges around that. There's always been the challenges around the rulings of the minister being able to fast-track him to get him into the Olympic team, because he has to attend a training camp by the rules to be able to get into that Olympic team, and you're not allowed to attend the camp until you're already an Australian. So there's problems left, right and centre for everyone with all of this. But yeah, and the other problem is there's been 4 citizenship ministers, 2 governments, 3 Wildcats owners, 5 people have been responsible within the club for looking after this during that time because of changes of staff, and 1 pandemic. So you put all those things together in the melting pot, and it's constantly relationships changing and who you have to talk to and who knows who and how you can sell your argument. And it's just constantly been them going back to the start and mounting a different argument. There's also been a court case that went through, which Bryce had to withdraw because he realised he wasn't going to win that as well. So they've tried so many different things, and it just feels like every time he gets closer and closer to something happening, he runs into another brick wall.
Yeah, very strange set of circumstances, and hopefully it doesn't cost the Wildcats and the NBL Bryce Cotton, because he would be one of the major draw cards, I would have thought, of that competition. How many MVPs has he now won for the Wildcats?
He's won 7. So he's been here for 8 full seasons and he's won 7. And the 1 year he didn't, he missed a third of the season with injury and still almost won it. So, yeah, there is no doubt that he is the best player we have seen play for the Wildcats. There's no doubt he's the best import we have seen in the NBL. And I don't think we're going to see anyone better for a hell of a long time. So we need to find a way, that the country and the sport needs to find a way to keep him here. And I will say it needs to be done before the next federal election, which is obviously in a couple of months, because there's a chance of a change of government again, the change of citizenship minister. And the current citizenship minister, Tony Burke, used to be in charge of the cyber security portfolio. So I reckon he might know something about Mark Arena over his time as Mark's role in cyber security business. So this might be the one chance, a semi-relationship between those two that may have been built over time to get this sorted. So I would be hoping that if something can happen, it would be between now and the election being called, but it would need to be fast-tracked really, really quickly to get some discretion happening.
Cats versus Melbourne United later in the week. Their form against Melbourne United not that great. How are we looking?
Yeah, so they've lost all their games against Melbourne this year. They had one game where they went and dominated the first half and then got blown away in the second half as Chris Goulding went nuts. They haven't had their entire squad available for any of those games, and that includes Bryce missing one of those matches. Dylan Windler's missed a couple. Ty Webster's missed a couple. So they haven't seen their full squad out there on the court, and they're pretty confident that with their full squad out there, they'll be a vastly different team. They need to make sure that Shea Illy doesn't get hold of Bryce and make his life difficult. I'd be sending someone out there to run into Shea a few times if I was John Riley, given he's held Bryce to 5 and 14 points in the 2 games they played this year. Last year, Bryce did score 36 and 24 points against him, though. So it's not like it's an ongoing thing over many, many years, but there is, Shea would be going in confident in regards to that. But they've got to head to Melbourne on Thursday and just do everything possible to get that win. Ty Webster called it a bit of a free hit, a bit of a free swing, have a go at that one and try to get it, and then come back to RAC Arena on Saturday night and try to lock it away. So if they can put some real pressure on in that first game and jag that one, it will certainly change the entire series and swing the momentum straight back into the Wildcats' favour. Aside
from protection of Bryce and making sure he can impact the game, what are the other keys to this one for the Cats, do you think?
They've got to rebound really well. They just have to hit the glass like it's no man's business. When they lose to United, it's usually because Bryce gets closed down and United control the rebounding. If they can fix the rebounding issue, which was a problem in the last game they had here, then I think that will go a hell of a long way towards helping them. Obviously, Keanu Pinder's in really good nick at the moment. Christian Doolittle's playing really well, and Dylan Windler loves to attack the glass also. So they've got all those guys who will have a real focus of hitting the rebounds hard, and if they can do that, it will certainly change the game.
And, of course, Perth Lynx as well in a do-or-die game against Townsville later in the week.
Yeah, they're up against Townsville on Wednesday night. They were really poor in the first quarter against the Fire in that opening game of the semi-final series on Saturday night. Got down by 11. They were down by 14 in the second quarter, and then charged back and hit the lead late. But as we know, when you're playing catch-up in any sport, it takes a lot of energy and a lot of luck to get yourself back into it. And once the energy and luck drop away a little bit, the opposition tend to find that energy and luck, and they pulled away late to win by 5. So not what they needed. They've been inconsistent during games throughout the season. They need to play a full 4 quarters, and it's now do or die. It's win and they get to come back here for the decider, or it's lose and their season is done. So Ellie Wilson was outstanding, as she has been all season. They need to have more contributions across the board. Letitia Amy here was great as well. They'll be looking to make sure that everyone fires from the tip-off rather than waiting until midway through the second quarter to get going this time.
Let's talk a bit of footy. Paul Marsh from the AFL Players Association was in town last week. You wrote a column in the West Australian about competitive balance and how the games that North Melbourne will play here that will reduce the travel burden is only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to competitive balance. Explain, what was the thrust of your column?
So it wasn't a column, it was an article, it was an interview with Paul Marsh. He's talking about what he's doing to try to work out what's happening within the entire AFL community. So if we use Collingwood as an example, not his example, my example, powerful club, plays all these games at the MCG, which has the AFL Grand Final, very rarely travels, has a massive supporter base, makes a massive amount of money. So they have all these advantages. And then you compare that to Gold Coast as an example, as a small club, small supporter base, not many players play for them who are from Queensland, and travels as well. So there's a big difference between how those two clubs are set up. So you say, well, one's got all this money, how do we help Gold Coast to be a bit more competitive compared to Collingwood from a financial perspective or compared to a crowd's perspective? What do they need? Is it draft picks? Is it salary cap room? Is it more games at home? How do you look at the differences between the powerful clubs that have clear advantages within the competition versus the ones that are weaker in terms of their location or their number of flights or their amount of money? And they're trying to work out across about 15 or 16 different criteria which clubs are the most advantaged and which clubs are the most disadvantaged, and then try to drag the disadvantaged ones up by giving them some sort of help, which we've seen with Fremantle on the West Coast. Their biggest disadvantage is travel, so they've given them an extra home game. What is going to happen over the coming years is the clubs that have clear disadvantages in terms of location or lists or whatever it is that are not going to change because of history and the way that they're located, will receive some sort of change to the way they're set up to help them to compete on the same level as the clubs that don't travel, have big money, have big lists, and a base where all their draftees come from.
The North Melbourne deal obviously sees the Kangaroos play 2 games in WA, one in Bunbury and one at Optus Stadium for several seasons. Do you see that, if it goes well, being expanded to include other clubs coming here to play North, or do you think this is it? This is what we're going to get?
I think North need the money, so they're going to be always looking to bring a game here as often as possible if they're making money. We know they've done it in Tasmania. They sent some games to the Gold Coast for a while. They were in Sydney, in Canberra. They've been all over the place, so that they tend to look for a location where they can make some money and to sell some games. And we have seen clubs over the years in a similar position also selling games all around the place. So if North Melbourne didn't bring a game here, I'm sure somebody else would jump at the opportunity to take that money. Will North Melbourne and another club come here and give Fremantle on the West Coast 14 games here? I'd be surprised if the AFL would allow that. I'd be surprised if the other AFL clubs would allow that. I think they'll all look at this 13th home game, especially with Fremantle expecting to be a strong team and a contender this year, and try to drag it back a little bit if it becomes a game that changes the ladder by the end of the season. If both teams were terrible, I don't think anyone would care. But if either team is good, then it will always change the way people think. And we saw that with the Gold Coast Academy situation, where no one cared about the Suns having an academy until they had good players. So everything always revolves around the ladder and what people see as an advantage or a disadvantage, as Paul Marsh pointed out.
Very quickly, we're still waiting on a result on the Ruben Ginbey push on Sam Lawler into the back of Sandy Brock. Obviously not Sandy Brock's fault. The question is, will the MRO view it as Ruben Ginbey's fault? I don't know why we're still waiting a week after the actual event. What's your take on it? You're usually the expert we turn to on matters umpiring and tribunal. What's your take on it?
Well, there's no doubt that Ruben committed a free kick, which was a push in the back in this situation, which caused damage to an opponent. So you can certainly argue that he's liable in that situation, but there's no precedent for pushing a player into a marking contest and having an injury cause a report. So I'm not sure from a legal standpoint with the rules whether they'll be able to find a way to cite him or whether they'll need to change the rules before the season begins to make it clear that it is illegal and will have ramifications. But I think they need to do something about that sort of an incident because it's highly dangerous. Now, I'm not saying that Ruben deliberately went out there and shoved him in hoping he'd break his jaw, but when these sorts of things happen, you are responsible for your own actions. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if it became a misconduct sort of charge rather than an unduly rough, or rather than a rough conduct charge or an unduly rough play charge, because then you can argue it slightly differently if it goes to a tribunal, and you can mount a case and come up with whatever figure you want. Whereas if it's a rough conduct charge, there'll be a severe impact and careless behaviour charge, which would be about 3 weeks, which is too much. So I reckon misconduct might be the type of way they try to go to test the waters at the tribunal and see what happens.
Just one more before I let you go. Is it acceptable that a week on from an event, we have supporters and players involved and teams involved still not knowing the outcome of an event in a multi-million-dollar industry like the AFL? Of
course not. No, it's not. It should be the day after every single time. We do it during the season. There's no reason why this should have taken so long. It should have been decided really, really quickly, and this is something that just shouldn't hang over a player's head, especially Ruben Ginbey's wondering, will I be okay to play in a couple of weeks' time? And that's as much of a punishment as a suspension sometimes. It takes away their mental energy, and players deserve to know what's happening, fans deserve to know what's happening, and it just doesn't make the league look good when they're waiting so long to make a decision like this.
Thank you so much for your time this morning, Craig, and thanks for your excellent writing on both footy and basketball in the West Australian. We'll look forward to talking to you as the season goes on and as the NBL finals go on.
No worries. Have a good day, everyone.
Craig O'Donoghue from the West Australian. Give us your thoughts on Ruben Ginbey. 0487 736 736. That is the Harvey Norman Busselton text line. 13 12 55 is the Barra and Dudley open line. Does he get cited? Does he not get cited? And I think we all agree we should have had an outcome by now. Back with more.